Hello and welcome to Drop Everything, the official podcast of the International Juggling Association. I'm your host, Dan Holzman, and today we have a great first podcast with David Cain, noted juggling historian. Before we begin, I want to thank the sponsor for today, who is Todd Smith. Todd Smith, also known as the Juggler's Friend. Go to toddsmith.com, check out his great props, including the Assassin, the club with deadly accuracy. And don't forget, if you mention the podcast, Drop Everything to Todd, you'll get a 10% discount on all the merchandise. So, sit back, grab a cold beverage, grab some props, and prepare to drop everything as we talk to David Cain. We're now recording with David Cain. This is the first podcast of Drop Everything, a juggler's podcast for the IJA. I thought it was important to have as my first guest David Cain because you're involved with something that I really feel is very important, maybe just us too, but that is documenting and recording the history of juggling.
Yes.
I think it's kind of a shame that the average person cares nothing about the history of juggling, but also that jugglers care very little about the history of juggling.
In general, that's true, but I do see that trend starting to change.
Now, before we get into the history in your collection, let's talk about the history of David Cain.
Okay.
So what first got you involved in juggling?
Boredom.
Boredom.
Yep.
What year was this? Because all years are pretty dull.
It was when I was 12 years old. Had nothing to do during that summer, and so I found 3 balls in a drawer, went out to my backyard, and just taught myself the basic 3-ball juggle.
That's pretty unusual. So you actually, with no knowledge of juggling, had you seen jugglers before that?
Not that I recall. I literally I had rummaging through a drawer, and there were 3 balls in there. There were some juggling instructions. I didn't take the juggling instructions. I just took the 3 balls, went out there, and I somehow knew that what a cascade looked like versus a shower. I didn't try to teach myself a shower. I just went out there.
But you must have seen juggling then, because without any instruction, so somehow it's just something to your brain, sort of subconsciously.
I suppose so. But I have no recollection of seeing someone that inspired me or anything like that.
Well, who was the first juggler that you saw after you learned, and did that person inspire you to then improve?
The first time I ever saw another juggler in person was the moment I stepped into a juggling convention in Cincinnati.
And how did you find out even about was this an IJA convention or
No, it was just a local, trying to remember what they called it. I can't even remember the name of it. It was just a local juggling festival in Cincinnati. They didn't hold it every year. It was every several years in a fairly small gym. But there were probably 50 jugglers there. And the first person that talked to me, at this point I could do 3 clubs with a couple tricks, 3 rings, 4 balls, cigar boxes, plate spinning, that type of stuff.
Where did you get your props from? Was you already aware of was there a Dubé at that time or a?
I got my stuff I think from Jugglebug. I somehow found out about Jugglebug.
Right. That's probably a name the more modern jugglers are not aware of.
Yes, probably not.
That may be a good thing, even though they helped a lot to popularize juggling, at least have props that were available. But they were kind of the would you say the whammo, the sort of low end of juggling props.
Definitely low end, but they had a low sticker price that people could get into it without a huge investment.
Yes.
And so, there were certainly some good pros to Jugglebug, but the quality of the prop was not the greatest.
So you're saying the first juggler that actually talked to you, who was that?
Was Mary Spar.
Oh, okay, Mary Spar, right.
Mary Spar from Xenia, Ohio, who trivia buffs would maybe recognize as being the first female to ever win a gold medal in the IJA numbers competition.
Okay, I got to get confused with another Mary that was also a collector.
Okay,
Mary Wilkins.
Mary Wilkins.
Yeah.
Mary Spar, she was the first female to ever win a IJA numbers gold medal. She's also right now and for the last several years has been the co-director of the numbers championships, along with my twin brother
What
Scott.
was the record in, or what was the competition?
Three-person club passing.
Okay. Was this fairly recently? What was the first year that a woman won a medal
Oh
in
my!
numbers?
I think it was 1990. 1990. It was the same year Francoise Rocher won seniors. So that would be 95.
Was that in Las Vegas or
Yes,
Sparks, Nevada?
yeah, one of the Nevada
I
ones.
think that's the one in Sparks that was held in that sort of travel lodge area. Not in Vegas, but near Vegas.
Right.
Yeah, not one of
So,
the more memorable conventions, I don't think.
yes. Um, but Mary was the first juggler that I ever talked to in person, and she really mentored me for many, many years, and still is a great friend today. Um, so I was hooked. I was a very introverted kid, and so I was pretty self-motivated. After I learned the basics of three-ball juggling, I went to the library and found a couple books on it. One was the Juggling book by Carlo, and another one was a book just about variety arts in general. And I went home and eventually made my first set of clubs by taking balls of socks and duct taping them to pieces of broom handle.
Well, those sound better than the juggle bugs, I think.
Well, and then I made shampoo bottle clubs, and then eventually I bought some juggle bugs, and then I moved on to DeBay and then Todd Smith.
So we're talking about like 1974, because that's the year that the Juggling book by Carlo came out.
Well, I'm not that old.
Oh, that's how I learned was from that book right when it came out.
Yes. This was about 1982.
Oh, okay.
81 or 82.
Right. So I guess I started probably about 8 years before you, because I started in 74.
Right.
And then, so was there any jugglers at that convention that stood out as being like exceptionally talented or professional?
No, there were three jugglers there that could do a five-ball cascade.
Okay. Then how did you find out about, let's say, like the IJA and get involved?
Well, probably by that time, I probably had already found the IJA somehow.
Mm-hmm.
And because I think that's how I found out about Juggle Bug and ordered the clubs and such.
Right.
So this was, I was already juggling for 2 years or so before I met anybody else.
That kind of reminds me of my story. It took like these 3 or 4 years. But like you say, as being an introverted guy, juggling is one of the few activities that you just go in the backyard, grab a few props. So I started with magic, and I always thought like magic you had to show somebody.
Right.
Or juggling you could do by yourself and just entertain yourself.
Yeah, that is a big difference. I was involved in magic on and off over the years, and that is a huge difference. You really can't do much magic-wise without an audience.
Now, so what was the first juggling convention from the IJ that you went to?
First one was in Atlanta in '85, and the first person I saw there, it was pretty amazing. My family and I were driving up, and Dan Bennett was out in front juggling 6 balls,
Right.
half shower, and we said, "Where do we go to register?" And he flashed 4 of them up and pointed in the direction and went back into it. And I still remember that to this day.
Well, Dan Bennett certainly is a good first example of juggling studliness.
Yes, yes.
And then at what point, so at that point when you went to the first convention, were you thinking about juggling as a career, or was it just a hobby at that point?
Oh, I was pretty hooked even at that point. I competed in juniors that year. Horrible act.
All right, hey, don't talk yourself up too much, David. Come on.
Yes,
Show
I
some
know.
humbleness here.
But
Any particular memories of that act? Did you wear the sparkly vest and the?
What I did was even back in those days, I was a multi-prop person. I did a wide variety of props, which is one of the things I'm known for. And so I made a circle of piles of props all over the stage, and I more or less hopped from one pile to the other to the next one doing a different prop. So no prop stand. Today, whenever I am coaching or mentoring a competitor or a performer, one of the things I always stress is don't put props on the floor unless there's a reason for it to be on the floor. And so I did not know that back in 1985. So luckily, the video for that year never came out due to, I guess, some legal issues. So the public has never seen that act of mine. So I appreciate that fact.
Now, is that because of the copyright of the music? I think we had to change that.
There's some issue with either that or the company that was producing the video, and the IJA had some legal issue or something to that extent. I can't remember what it was.
Any remembrance of who won that year or who the big players were back then?
The winner was he's on the tip of my tongue. I can picture him. I believe he's from San Francisco.
That wasn't Michael Cass, because that was far ago.
No. Who won? Andrew Head won seniors.
Oh, okay.
Ken Falk won juniors.
Ken Falk, one of the disappearing jugglers who showed great promise as a young man, and maybe he found girls or something, and then decided that maybe juggling wasn't the path for him.
Who knows? And Dana Tyson and Benji Hill won teams that year.
Okay. I talked to Dana Tyson not that long ago. He's off doing the cruise ships.
Oh, yeah.
And Benji Hill I have not talked to in quite a long time. His story and his involvement with the IJA took a turn at a certain point.
It definitely did.
Well, I think he sort of got a reputation as somebody who maybe got a little too much inspiration from others, so to speak.
That's a very nice way of putting it.
Well, this podcast is not about slamming other jugglers.
Sure.
There certainly have been a few over the course of the years, in my involvement with the IJ and your involvement as well. But I would say, and I think you would agree, that 99% of the jugglers you meet are really friendly, helpful, and pretty good people overall. Overall in general. So then, what was your first professional job? So you'd been juggling for a few years before you went to the convention.
Yeah.
You competed. Didn't quite go as the way you wanted to.
No, I competed again 2 years later and got second place in a very controversial placement, I guess. But
why was it controversial?
Well, because they didn't announce who won for several hours after the competition was over.
Okay.
And I had tons and tons of people, including many of the judges, coming up to me afterwards and saying, "Oh, you got this, you won. There's no doubt." And I ended up getting second to someone who didn't do a whole lot of great juggling, but did backflips, and it turned out my technical score was by far the highest, but my performance score was fifth. And so he squeaked past me with a lot of non-juggling things. So the people who thought that the technical score should be count higher really thought that I had won, and vice versa. But
that was the big controversy for a long time, was that the judging was broken into a 60-40 kind of ratio.
Right.
And that as time went by, I was hopeful in trying to institute more of a categories within the judging context.
Right. And I appreciate the work you did on that, because I think the judging is the most fair it's ever been.
Well, I mean, it comes down to a juggling contest. Obviously, performance counts, style, creativity, but juggling itself has to be the main criteria for a juggling contest.
Right.
It's not really a talent show so much as a display of juggling skill. Now, did you ever win the juniors? Were you ever...
No, I didn't win juniors. I just got the silver there. In teams, I've gotten fourth, third, second, and first. I got fourth, third, and second with my twin brother Scott, and then dumped him and won it with Jay Gilligan.
Good move.
Uh,
Now let's talk about your brother a little bit. Did he also start juggling the same time as you? Because you're also known as one of the sets of twins we have. I mean, there's quite a
yes,
few twin
there
jugglers.
are. There are. He didn't start when I did. He started about a year or so later on, and really didn't take it very seriously for quite a while. Uh, it's a funny story. What really got him to practice more, and that is when we were 16 years old. Um, uh, he got a job flipping hamburgers at a fast food restaurant, and I got called to do to open for the Grateful Dead, and this is the same day.
Right.
So we both came home from our jobs, and I said, "How much did you make today?" He said, "Oh, like $23. How much did you make?" And I said, $900. And he said, "I got to practice my juggling."
There you go. So there was a monetary incentive.
Yes, yes.
Now, so was your first professional jobs with him under the name Raising Cain? I remember that was one of the monikers you guys used.
Actually, we originally were called Mirrored Images,
Okay.
which I totally forgot about until I found an old business card recently.
Now, the first time I saw you guys perform, if you remember, was in that circus in the parking lot in Atlantic
Yeah.
City. Was that how far along was that in your career?
We were in college. We had just finished our freshman year of college. And I'll never forget that. We gave the worst performance of our life with you, Dick Franco, and Noel Franco in the audience. We majorly choked.
Well, I'm sure we were very understanding and
Oh, absolutely, you absolutely were. But we gave into the pressure of juggling celebrity in the audience. We seemingly forgot how to juggle and that day, but that's all right.
Well, before we go any further, let's talk a little bit about that as far as because for hopefully younger jugglers who listen, we can also offer some advice. How would you suggest that people handle the pressure? Because that's got to be one of the hardest things is you're practicing, you're juggling in the gym or in your local environment. All of a sudden now there's someone you want to impress or there's a crowd. How do you go about handling those nerves?
Well, I don't tend to get nervous at all for shows, and it's always been the case for me, except for competitions,
Right.
And then except for in that case. I don't know. I think every person is different. We talked about Dana Tyson a little bit ago. Dana is a wonderful performer, very successful, does cruise ships, but he says he gets huge butterflies still before every show, and I don't experience that. So the rare times I do, which like I said would be mainly competitions, and then the time I did it for you and Dick Franco and Noel. That stands out. You just have to be prepared. You have to really, really know your act.
I think that would be the key for me as well. Is that you got to feel like there's no reason for you to drop. If you're dropping 8 or 9 times in practice, then you go to perform. You can't expect to do well. But if you go to yourself, there's no reason for me to drop. I'm doing it really well 3 or 4 times in a row with no drops. Because we all know if you're dropping a bunch in practice, when you hit that stage, you can multiply it by 3 or something.
Easy. And dealing with, the lights of a stage or a circus tent or whatever, or the rolling of a cruise ship, you've got to have your act down well. If, my typical show is a 45-minute stage show. And I rarely drop at all on that show. And if you're dropping a lot in your regular show, there's something wrong with your show, or you need to rework that.
Do you think that most jugglers attempt stuff that's too difficult? Like they push beyond their boundaries?
Oh, definitely. And a lot of it has to do with the age of YouTube. If you're like, well, if I can do it on a YouTube video and it took me only 30 times to get the trick, I should put that in my act.
Well, I think that's
No,
one
you
thing that
should.
sort of disappoints me sometimes is you'll see a juggler on YouTube and you'll go like, oh my God, this guy is fantastic. But then when you see them live, you go, oh, I get it. Everything they did took multiple takes. What can they do live?
Yeah, and you know, in YouTube video, the typical technical YouTube video, that's all it is. It's technical stuff. But you know, being able to do technical stuff and being able to perform and keep an audience for 45 minutes or an hour, that's a completely different thing. Completely different animal.
Well, I mean, you have editing, you have music, I mean, as far as the YouTube videos. But that whole syndrome of watching a juggler on YouTube and then thinking they're better isn't new. I remember we had a VHS tape of Barrett Felker doing 5 club back crosses.
Right.
And this must have been back in the 80s sometimes. And then I asked him about that video because he just nails it, does it flawlessly. And even back then, it was something he had done multiple takes of, and that was just the one, of course, that he included.
Right.
So I think that's another thing when people talk about, oh, isn't this guy a great juggler? Like when they compare jugglers to Anthony Gatto, a lot of times they compare like a juggler they've seen on YouTube to a working professional like Anthony. And I think for guys like you and me who are really into sort of the professional side of juggling, when someone says a great juggler, we usually think of as a great professional juggler, meaning that part of it is what has he done in his professional career and how does he operate under the pressures of the highest stakes situation.
Right, right.
Like when you see Anthony at that Golden Clown was at Monaco Circus Festival, and you realize that that's the epitome or the pinnacle of sort of his world or his field. And for him to pull off what he does flawlessly, same as like you're saying, even on a smaller scale, when someone competes at the IJA. Like you're saying in your regular shows, you don't feel nerves. But when you're performing or competing again in front of other jugglers, it's very difficult. And what you can pull off in that environment really says a lot about you.
And unfortunately, there's for a competitor, like if you're competing in juniors or something like that, there's not a great way of really recreating that feel apart from the actual competition.
Well, it's also sometimes where you have like a professional will compete, and he kind of goes in with the act he does.
Right.
Or if someone's an amateur and they want to compete, they don't really have a chance, like you're saying, to really perform that in front of a lot of people. Sometimes the first time they have a chance to actually be in front of people is at the competitions.
Yeah, which under the toughest possible conditions, both psychologically and also often, they're not used to working with stage lights and all those types of things as well.
But I'm sure you'll agree that that's where you learn the most. By getting up in front of people, that's where the lessons are so amplified. And unless you do that, unless you're willing to put yourself in those situations, like I remember one of the times I competed, it was in Baltimore, and one of the prop manufacturers, before I went on, he said like, oh, your silicone balls look kind of ratty, or maybe I was even using lacrosse balls at the time. He goes, let me give you these brand new silicone balls to use in the competition. Right. I'm like, oh my God, that's great. But I didn't realize that when my hands got a little bit sweaty, that these balls would basically turn into like ice cubes. And so I got up there and I went to do my 5-ball juggling, and even like the cascade was almost impossible for me to handle. So that knowledge of saying, okay, from now on, you have to make sure you wear the shirt you're going to wear, use the props you're going to wear, try to duplicate as much as you can the situation. So that was a lesson that I would have preferred to learn somewhere else, but it's certainly one I've never forgotten even to this day because of the memorable nature of the flopola that occurred.
Oh, wow. Well, at least, you did have the most perfect seniors act ever.
I was one of the few guys who did go dropless.
Dropless and not even a fumble. When Albert Lucas competed and won, he at least had a fumble. But you had more or less what I would consider the absolute most flawless competition act ever.
I appreciate that, and I also came in second.
Yes, you did.
I did. He was the
Miguel
Ferreira.
Yes.
Yeah, he was a bounce juggler from, and that's one of the reasons I decided to get involved with the competitions. Because I thought, given the criteria of what they were supposed to be looking for, I felt I should have won. I showed more versatility, I showed a theme, I showed more creativity. He had a couple of more difficult stunts, because I think I stopped at like 5 balls, and he did a couple of tricks with 6. But I felt he was sort of your standard Mexican circus juggler. And there certainly is a sort of certain Mexican style.
Oh, yeah.
That is very passed down through the families. And so to have gone flawless and then go, okay, you're still going to be beaten by a guy who dropped a few times. Just use one prop and you used 4 or 5. Because also like yourself, I'm a guy who really likes versatility. I think one of your famous things people remember you for is the video you made where you did, 64 different types? Is that the correct number?
61 types
61.
of juggling. Yeah, that's my most famous YouTube video.
So what would people want to see that? They would just look up David Cain, 61 types of juggling?
Yep, on YouTube. Yep.
And that's just in like 3 or 4 minutes, correct? I mean...
Yeah, you see about 10 seconds of each thing. It's a fairly brief video, maybe 6 or 7 minutes at the most. I can't remember exactly, but yeah. And I need to update that sometime. But
okay, we're up to a higher number now. What do you think the number is
I'm
now?
up to a higher number, and some of the things like my whip cracking and my boomerang juggling and things, I can do so much better than what I have on there.
Now, do you consider things like whip cracking and boomerang juggling or more like object manipulation?
Well, they're object manipulation. And even in that video, I say it's 61 types of juggling and object manipulation. So
what would you say the difference is? Do you feel that there's is it the throwing and catching of an object that makes it juggling?
Well, for me, I'm not too picky. I have a fairly broad definition, but not everyone does. So that's why if you say both, then you kind of cover all the bases.
I kind of call it the gravity arts. I know that's maybe a pretentious name, but because I always think that if it's cool, I'll put it under the umbrella of juggling. Baton twirling, boomerang, frisbee.
Yep.
And even stuff like poi, of course, which involves no throwing or catching, has a lot of similarities to juggling.
Yeah.
Now, out of all of those categories of props and manipulation, would you say you have a favorite?
Well, certainly my expertise would be in club juggling, ball bouncing, ball spinning, boomerang juggling, and combination tricks. Those 5, I think, are my best category.
You also have a YouTube video on musical combination tricks as well. I remember seeing that one.
Yep.
Because you're also a musician as well. Do you feel there's a lot of similarities, or it's easier to learn, let's say, something like music coming from juggling, or was music first and then the juggling?
They actually started around the same age. I play to a great differing levels, 9 different instruments, I guess. My mom was a high school music teacher or a public school music teacher for 30 years. So I play piano, guitar, ukulele, dulcimer, harmonica, melodica, just a whole bunch of different things. And I do see a lot of similarities. I mean, rhythm obviously is a very important aspect of both. Muscle memory, just knowing how to learn things. I don't think I'm naturally that gifted in juggling or music, but I do know how to learn things. And if you know how to properly learn a skill, that's going to take you a long way.
But also, like juggling and music, there are a couple of the few activities that require the use of both hands equally adeptly. Sure. So that idea where like if you do, you play bowling or badminton or tennis, they're always so one hand dominant. Yep. And then of course when you get into drumming, you have all 4 limbs, which is even trickier than juggling. When I did a little drumming, and it's to do that 4 limb isolation or coordination is quite difficult. But let's get back though to a little bit about your history. So you worked with your brother, and then how long did that act go for? And what were some of the highlights of that?
Well, I worked at Kings Island Amusement Park for 7 years, all throughout high school and college, except for that summer that I was toured with the circus, where you
Was that with your
were
brother
there.
at the amusement park, or was?
Yep, yep. He was there for the first 5 of the 7 years. Um, but it was a great job for being a high school and college student. It was nearby. Um, I got to do multiple shows a day, 6 days a week. Huge number of shows over the years. That really helped me both technically to juggle under pressure and also as a performer. Because originally I was a extremely introverted person who really didn't like to talk in public. When I was younger, I had a speech impediment really badly. So over the years, and especially during that period, I went from someone who would never talk in public as a juggler to someone who, today does a complete talking comedy act the entire way through. So there was certainly a personal development for me over that time.
That's certainly a job I would recommend to young jugglers as well. Anywhere we can do lots of shows. And sometimes amusement parks, they're not the best paying. But one of my first jobs was at Magic Mountain, was 8 hours a day. It was half an hour on, half an hour off. So I would do 8 half-an-hour sets. I did a lot of line relief, which was entertaining at the lines of the roller coasters. And for me, that was an opportunity to sort of try the same joke or the same trick over and over again because the crowd just kept moving along.
I agree. If you define a show as performing for a different audience,
right,
think how many shows you can get in a day at an amusement park.
I got in quite a bit, but I also hid out a lot because nobody ever would watch me. So if they ever saw me behind reading or something, well, that's part of my half an hour that's off. I mean, you caught me during one of those break times because juggling is fun. Juggling as a hobby is fun, but then when you get into the working environment, there are definitely elements of it, the repetition of perhaps doing the same routines. Sometimes you're forced to work under the conditions, like if it gets very hot, especially when you're working outdoors or in the sun, where it can kind of diminish some of the pure enjoyment of just juggling for its own sake. So you were always, even from the beginning, it seemed like you kind of had at least this desire to do it for money and to do it professionally. Was there a time when you said, okay, this is going to be my profession?
Oh, I think pretty early on. Even though I went to college and got a degree, the plan always was to juggle. And
were your parents supportive in that? Was that something that you had expressed to them?
They were very supportive, and never had any issue with that. They weren't like a stage parents. That,
they didn't push you into it by any means.
They didn't push me into it at all, but if I wanted to do something, they were quite supportive.
All right, so you worked with this amusement park for a while with your brother. Then at a certain point you decided either to leave the amusement park or some other opportunities arose?
Well, what happened was I graduated from college and did one more summer of the amusement park, and then I said to myself, well, I have a degree. I've never worked a real day in my life other than performing. Let me try the real world of work. And so for 4 years, I worked as a guidance counselor for adults with disabilities. I have a degree in psychology, but having a bachelor's in psychology is like having a bachelor's in pre-unemployment.
Okay.
But I used it for a little bit, and I still did gigs on the side. But I wasn't really happy with it. And so during that time, I developed the idea of doing a Christian ministry with my juggling, and developed that while still working, and that took off like crazy. The last year working full time as a guidance counselor, I did 182 gigs.
And that was while working full time.
While working full time, and so I said, I can't do this. So I quit the day job, and that first year of working full time after that, I did 235 separate bookings.
So when you left the
and-
amusement park, that was pretty much also the end of your working with your brother, because then you got a real job, you're saying, and he went out to get a real job. He didn't go on to be a professional juggler at all.
No, he got a great job right out of college. I mean, he was recruited while I was still in college, I believe, working for the federal government, and he's a big wig with the federal government. That's all I'm supposed to publicly say.
I see. So he's a spy, basically.
No, he's not a spy.
He's not a spy. He operates drones, well, let's just leave it at that. He does something mysterious for the government. He's on call at any time, has a license to kill. We'll just leave it at that.
That ends part 1 of our 2-part podcast with David Cain. Thanks again to our sponsor, Todd Smith. Don't forget to mention this podcast to Todd. You get a 10% discount. Thanks also to the engineer, Karen Holzman, for doing all the engineering. And thanks to you for listening to the very first podcast, Drop Everything, from the International Juggling Association. Check out part 2. And until then, drop everything except when you're juggling.